Hi, everyone. It's Jen DeWall. And on this week's episode of the Leadership Habit Podcast, I sat down with Nancy Marmolejo, who is an award-winning Latinx executive coach and keynote speaker who teaches leaders and entrepreneurs how to tap into their deep genius. That one-of-a-kind combination of innate strengths, life experiences, and learned expertise that only you can bring to the table. And let me tell you a little bit more about Nancy. As the founder of talentandgenius.com, she's committed over 15 years to uncovering what makes us great and putting that into a compelling, authentic message, founder stories, leadership training, communication skills, development, and personal brands. She's a popular speaker at leadership conferences and business events. Her work has been featured in Forbes, the Huffington Post, Latina, Univision, Smart Money, Redbook. I could go on. And her clients include leaders in the hospitality industry, engineering, aerospace, global consulting teams, and so many more. Now, I hope you enjoy our conversation as Nancy and I sit down and talk about how you can develop and tap into your deep genius. Hi, everyone. It's Jen DeWall. And on this week's episode of the Leadership Habit Podcast, I'm sitting down with Nancy Marmolejo, an executive coach and keynote speaker. And today we're going to talk about how to tap into your deep genius and discover the strengths of your team. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. It's great to have you.
Jen, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much.
So Nancy, how do you even start to maybe become interested in the subject of finding a deep genius? I mean, it's a big conceptual topic, but I know it's important, but tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Sure. I look at the word genius, and if you look it up in the dictionary, it doesn't just mean that you have a super high IQ or this extraordinary intellectual ability. It also means extraordinary creative or other natural abilities. And so I truly believe that we all walk around with extraordinary natural abilities. It's just a matter of seeing them, finding them, claiming them. My very first career, I worked as a teacher, and my students were the kids who were falling through the cracks, and the system really wasn't there to champion their success, unfortunately. And I would look at each one of them just so deeply and look at their life experience, look at their innate strengths, look at the things that I could see they were doing well, and reflect that back to them. And suddenly there was a whole different way of viewing themselves as students, as just members of society. And I when I started my business, which was a few years ago, I'll drop that, over a decade. I took that concept to work with business owners and professionals and leadership organizations to show people we have so many folks just walking around not understanding their value and sort of being gaslit to think that they're not all that they are. So that's my mission, and that's what I'm out here, preaching the gospel of deep genius.
But it's such an important gospel, and it's such an important message. I think about even where I was at earlier in my career, I would have benefited so much from hearing someone say, hey, you may have gotten some feedback and you may have really taken that personally and used that to make assumptions about yourself and your capabilities. But guess what? That's not actually true. It doesn't have to be true. And let's maybe challenge that. Like, I think that, you don't realize that when you're even starting your career, or even when you're starting in a new company, you don't realize that we can still be malleable, that we don't have to take on like the pain, feedback, whatever that is, and use that to dull our light. And that it's also not cocky to like talk about your deep genius. I just think the work that you're doing is so important. What do you see as the biggest problem with work today in terms of understanding deep genius, or maybe just getting people to be able to identify their own values?
Well, the feedback that I get when I deliver workshops or keynotes or any kind of trainings especially in corporate environments, is people always come back to me and they say, nobody's ever bothered to find out more about me. What people are doing is looking at what's on paper. The resume is great, but it doesn't tell everything. And when we find out, here's an example. This one is real easy. Like when we find out that somebody is a student athlete, and we see these people in the Olympics, and they're winning gold medals, and they're in medical school and they're, valedictorians. It's like, wow, that person has some amazing capabilities and some amazing leadership and some self-discipline. We can put that all together. Just that same way, there are things in our lives where we're the equivalent of an Olympic gold medalist or, in med school or valedictorians. What are the things that we have done in life, the life experiences that we have had? Sometimes it's not necessarily things that you want everybody finds out from your LinkedIn profile. Right. But it's having that understanding that we bring life experiences, we bring innate strengths. We might have some different kinds of trainings, and all of that puts us together into a very unique, valuable bundle. Not being able to have the space to expose that and explore that, I think, is one of the biggest problems that we have.
Yeah. And it's that, looking at that resume, it's so limiting, right? A resume. How could I possibly put my personality into a resume? I don't know if I would then make it colorful, maybe have it scented. There is so much that's missing, right? It's very flat. I mean, it's a piece of paper, but it's very flat. And I also, I'm curious what your thoughts are too. Like one of the problems around not only leaders or organizations maybe taking the time to get to know someone at a human level through their diversity, but also that as individuals, I know for me, sometimes if I wasn't achieving an award, if I wasn't doing something grand, like being picked to be on a committee or something, oftentimes I also am like, well, I guess if they want someone that's like that and I'm not that, then I guess I don't produce value. Right. So I guess I thought of, as you said, and use those examples of the athletes, like, I'm not winning gold medals. So what value do I have? I think sometimes that's easy to believe or start to tell yourself. So
right.
let's dive into like what a deep genius is. What is understanding our deep genius? Because we're going to help our audience really understand how to tap into that today. So how do we discover a deep genius? And before we get there, what is it?
Sure. And let's just pretend that we're all in a workshop together, or I'm guiding you through one of the deep genius events and exercises, because that's really where it gets fun. So you want to think about a couple of different things. One is that we all have innate strengths. We all have things that come easy to us. There's things that we know how to do without knowing how we know how. Does that make sense? It's like yes, what you know without knowing how you know it.
I think that's a strange, like when I think about people are like, oh, Jen, you do speaking and you like that. And that is honestly one of the things for myself. Like, I don't know how I can do it. I'm not trying to be cocky in it. It's just something I feel very comfortable in. And I could not tell you how.
Yes. So we have people who are naturally good with numbers, naturally good with taking things apart and putting them back together again, naturally good at sensing how others are feeling. You can look back at when you were a kid, and these are things that you've just always had and have always been true for you. Maybe there's a natural sense of design and aesthetic, or a natural sense of engineering and understanding how things work. These are innate strengths, innate gifts that we have. And they could be either a skill, such as something that you know how to do. Like I've always loved to write. And I was talking. Like my mom told me that when I was little, I just started talking. There was no baby talk. There was no, it's like I went from like, a baby to like, hey, how you doing, everybody? And so
like, I have a grown child here. What?
Yeah. It's like, I just went into that. It was like, and she reflected that back to me when I was older. And I thought, oh, I felt comfortable teaching and talking in front of others before I even knew what that was. Some people I notice have this amazing sense of empathy. They could just look and sense somebody. Other people have the leadership. They're not afraid to take charge, the daredevil, the adventurer, all of these things. And whether it's nature or nurture, there's so many sources of it. It just is. So that's the first piece of it, is things that you're innately great at, those things that you know how to do without really knowing how you know how to do them.
So here's our message, right? To right now, everyone, like, you have an innate strength. You have an innate strength, even if you're driving in your car and you're thinking or comparing yourself to someone else, you absolutely have an innate strength.
Yeah, just think of those things that you're the go-to person for, or they come easily and naturally to you. And what happens more often than not is we overlook these because they come so naturally to us. It's like, oh, come on, that's so easy. Well, when I hire a plumber, and pay plumber prices, that take the person 2 seconds to fix something, I think to myself, oh my gosh, but they have that gift. It's easy for them, but not easy for me. So I can say, oh my gosh, you're so talented. You just did that. They might not think, well, I just, it was nothing. Or somebody who's naturally, a speaker or a writer or a leader, somebody else might look at them and say, I just don't know how you do that. And they say, I just do it. They might think everybody can do that. Well, not everybody can do it. What happens is we can't always see it in ourselves. Our eyes are on the inside looking out. Our eyes aren't on the outside looking in. And one thing I always tell people is imagine what it's like when you're in a store and you see yourself on the security camera. So it's like, oh, do I look like that? You start standing up a little straight.
Target, when I'm checking out, I'm like, is this what I look like?
Yeah, like, oh gosh, I gotta, pull that stomach in or stand straight. And it's like suddenly we're aware of ourselves, or oh, look at me, I look pretty good. We don't see ourselves. Sometimes it's helpful for somebody else. That's why when I do Deep Genius, any kind of workshops around this, I love having a group and getting people into small groups and breakout sessions and pairing up with somebody and just reflecting these things back and forth, because we can't always see it in ourselves. So that's the first part, is the innate piece. There are two other areas where I advise people to look. So I'll share those too.
Yeah.
Okay. So I also encourage you to look at your life experiences. Life experiences teach us things, and whether it's the highs or the lows, the birth of a child, falling in love. We find out, I never knew I could love so much. I never knew my heart could burst open. Caring for somebody in the end of life stages, the loss of a loved one, is that deep grief. What did it teach you? What is something that you maybe you thought I could never go on, and then you found out that you can. Where I am in California, and you're in Colorado, we are just wildfires happening all around us. There has been loss, there has been catastrophe, and what some people find out is, I never knew I could be the support system that I am, or I never knew I could get through a natural disaster. So many different things. Or maybe, traveling, living abroad, having, moved from one country to another, being an immigrant. We have life experiences that show us things about ourselves. And I encourage people to take an inventory and look and see, what are the strengths that were gifted to you as a result of that experience, whether it was something that was difficult or something that was really beautiful and joyful.
What a great place to start. I think, what comes to mind for me is that what you're saying is that no matter who you are, look for your highs, your lows, and the messages that can come out. And I think sometimes people miss out on those life experiences. And I'm curious if you agree, because we often, when we look at the lows or the lessons in life, I feel like right, sometimes might compare myself to someone else. And so then I minimize my experience because it doesn't seem as difficult, tragic, X glory, like amazing as someone else's. So again, it's that like ugly cycle of not even of missing out on that opportunity to learn, because I'm somehow saying my life experience wasn't what someone else's was.
Right.
I'm curious, do you see that a lot with your clients?
Yeah. And I think it's part of it is sharing the stories and having somebody else, tell me a story about a difficult time in your life and, what came out of it. And you tell that story, and the person who's listening to you sharing starts spotting other things. It's like, wow, I see creativity. I see leadership. I see innovation. I see resilience, and they start reflecting back to you things that you might not have taken inventory. And that's where we start to build this understanding that there's more to us than what it says on the performance review or what it says on the resume. And one of the metaphors I like to use is, where I live, I'm near the redwood forests in Northern California. And so I go hiking through the redwoods. And one of the things about redwood trees is that their bark is fire resistant, which is interesting. And I wonder why their bark is fire resistant. Trees, if there's a fire, it's hard for a redwood tree to completely burn down. There, you will go through the forest and you'll see these black scars all over the trees because fire has touched it, but it continues on. And so one thing I look at it and I think, wow, that is resilience. I go hiking through the redwoods to remind myself of any trauma or pain I've experienced. And I'm looking at this tree standing tall and mighty and think to myself, okay, I can rise too. What are the strengths I brought along? And interestingly enough, with redwood trees, they're little seed cones. The only way those seeds can get released is through intense heat. So it's like they have to experience that fire, that what could be like that hardship in order to even go on. There's so many lessons that you can get. I think that's why people love hiking in the redwood forest, is you just like feel the wisdom of the earth all around you.
Wow. I had no idea. And that makes me, think of a diamond. I know that a diamond comes to be through pressure, but I had no idea that redwood seeds needed that heat to be able to grow in, but yet they also are, wow, beautiful stories about resilience and growth and overcoming adversity.
Yeah.
Oh
So
my
we
gosh.
think about that in our own life stories. Like, where have we had to go through that? And then the last piece that I ask people to look at is, okay, well, let's look at some of your formal training and how has that meshed with your innate gifts? How has that meshed with your life experience? And I think, well, people have probably heard the story of this college dropout who had this beautiful sense of aesthetics, but was also very strong-willed. Some people might say kind of a jerk, but visionary and strong-willed, and the sense of aesthetics, who had the life experiences of traveling and going on a spiritual journey, and then had the training in electronics and in calligraphy, oddly enough. And then this person dropped out of college and ended up partnering with another person to start a computer company that introduced us to beautiful fonts and a minimalist aesthetic and this sense of design that prior to that, you did not equate computers with beautiful lettering and a sense of design, or even the shape and size of the computer or the various devices that this company came out with and their aesthetic. So do you know who it is that I'm talking about?
I mean, that's got to be Steve Jobs.
It's Steve Jobs. Yeah.
So I didn't know that he had a background in calligraphy. That is a new one.
He took calligraphy in college. He was like a total, like in college, he was just like, I'm just going to take calligraphy, but he fell in love with fonts. So what happened when Apple Computer started is we started exploring beautiful lettering. We can thank him for that. And so we look at these different life experiences. I think about Malala, who at the age of 14 was shot in the face for being a proponent of education for girls in her country. And now she is an international spokesperson for education for girls, women's rights. There are her life experience and all the things that came out of her presented us with this leader. And she couldn't be where she was now if she didn't have this natural curiosity and leadership capability, if she wasn't, mentored. Her father was a teacher and created a school for girls, and her life experience of this horrific act of violence that then made her become just the symbol of a movement worldwide. So we have so many different things that place us where we are now as geniuses without we didn't set out and say, okay, I'm going to be this. It's just following the trajectory of life and paying attention to how these three components are all acting together.
I love that. Okay. So deep genius, for those that are still, is the combination, or the combination of our natural abilities, our life experiences, and then maybe our education and skills development or just development in that way. And so that combination brings us to where we are today, and it leads us on our path for where we can go tomorrow or how we can continue to evolve. Why don't people connect with it? Like, what do you see? Why don't people connect with it, or how do we get lost from being able to see our deep genius?
I just don't think we have enough opportunities to even have the conversation or do the exploration. And and then also what I'd said before is like we don't always see it in ourselves. But then again, what you just mentioned, like the resume and the education, we look at the school, we look at the, like, oh, they went to that school, we better hire them. That means they're good.
Mm.
Not necessarily. There are people who, if you look at somebody who didn't come from the right school, but they have this life experience that is far more valuable than the institution or the degree that they received, or they have this innate combination of gifts that you think, wow, that is, you don't see that often. So if we're only going by what's on paper, that's something. I gave a workshop to a large aerospace organization that they send people, to outer space. We should know who they are. 4 letters. Anyhow, and at the end of this, we were giving feedback, and somebody had said, I wish this was part of our onboarding process. I wish that when we step foot into this company, somebody would just find these things out about us, because they think, oh, we don't have the talent for that. We have to keep seeking. We have to find all these people. And the talent is right under our noses. We just need to take a moment. I think it saves a lot of money to just find out what are the assets and the gems that we have right here. Dig a little deeper into who is currently here right now, as opposed to saying, oh, we lack this, let's go on this big expensive quest to find that position, when meanwhile it was right there and that person sitting next to you. You just didn't have the opportunity or the structure to find it out.
Yeah, you may not have asked. It could be that simple. You just never asked. Crestcom is a global organization dedicated to developing effective leaders. Companies all over the world have seen their managers transformed into leaders through our award-winning and accredited leadership development programs. Our signature BPM program provides interactive management training with a results-oriented curriculum and prime networking opportunities. If you're interested in learning more about our flagship program and developing your managers into leaders, please visit our website to find a leadership trainer near you. Or maybe you yourself have always wanted to train and develop others. Crestcom is a global franchise with ownership opportunities available throughout the world. If you have ever thought about being your own boss, owning your own business, and leveraging your leadership experience to impact businesses and leaders in your community, Crestcom may be the right fit for you. We're looking for professional executives who are looking for a change and want to make a difference in people's lives. Learn more about our franchise opportunity on the Own a Franchise page of our website at crestcom.com. How do you start to begin this journey to tackle understanding your own deep genius? Like, how do you, figure out, like, okay, now that I'm looking at this, like, especially if you're still stuck with maybe the limitation believing that your education or your degrees or your something makes you qualified. How do you start to maybe peel back to be able to see this more inclusive sense of value that represents the 3 components?
Well, some people can do it on their own. And there's a self-awareness that allows them to say, oh, look at that. I see this about myself. Boom, there I go. Other people, you really need to, whether it's in with a partner or a coach or a group of people, there's something about being seen by somebody else, having that space of being able to have somebody reflect back to you what it is that they're seeing and hearing. That's very valuable. Or if a person just can commit to doing some self-reflection and understanding that little voice is going to pop up every now and then saying, you have no right to claim that. No, that's not valuable. Everybody can do that. You're not the one. You're a fake. All of that imposter talk, all of that I'm a fake talk. Understand that might come up. and just keep doing it anyhow, just for fun, just to I would tell my clients, it's like, just humor me and write it down. Okay, let's just pretend that we could put that inner critic in the other room for a moment, and what can we do to just honestly get an assessment. And so once I'll tell people, just write it in 3 columns. Here's your innate gifts, and here's your life experience, and here's your education, and start looking at it. And the fun part, and this is the part that I like the most, is when you just start looking for unusual combinations. Where are the unusual combinations, and what does that say about you? So a few years back, I was at a leadership conference for women in engineering, and I had them pair up. This is when we were in person. I had them pair up, and it was so interesting because before the conference, somebody said to me, "Oh, they won't like this. This is no engineers. They're going to want you to just be straightforward, tell them what to do, let them go out. They don't want to think. They don't want." And I said, "Oh, you're kind of generalizing, but I don't know, let's see," because they accepted my proposal for the conference, so maybe they'll like it. Well, first of all, it was standing room only. There were so many people that just filled this room. And then once they got into pairs, we found out there was somebody who was trained as an opera singer and a chemical engineer. And and she had kind of a mishmash educational background. There was somebody who was into like crystals, or somebody who just had a breakup. I mean, there were all these different life experiences and combinations. So rather than look at this room and say, okay, they're all engineers, I can make all these assumptions about them. I now have these levels of depth and nuances about who they are. And the great thing is that at the end of that workshop, there were people pairing up and going into the hallway, and they were like, "We're going to start an app," or "We're having a meeting." It created these connections for people where they didn't realize that person sitting over there was exactly the kind of combination of skills and strengths and innate gifts that they needed to be in contact with. So you just have to put it out in the open. We can't just read minds and assume that we know.
Okay, so here's the assignment for all of the leadership habit guests. This is where you're going to take your piece of paper. This is coming from Nancy. You are going to write down what your natural abilities are and put your self-doubt to the side, because we all have self-doubt. Or I love when people say they don't have self-doubt, Nancy. I'm just like, what? And second thing, so put your columns, right? So first column, what are your natural strengths? Second column, what are your life experiences that are unique to you? And you don't even have to find a meaning to them. Like, think about the ones that stand out. You don't have to attach it, because you had said, and then do your third, which is your skills, education, background, and then combine them all together and look for your own themes. Don't try to make them into something to say whether or not you're enough. Just be curious about it. That's the first assignment. And I hope that everyone does that that's listening to this podcast.
That's the starting off point. That is the starting off point. And I think there's something that when we realize that we do have a very unique combination, I mean, that's not the ending point. That's the starting point. And people will sometimes contact me and say, "Nancy, tell me what my deep genius is." And I'm said, I don't do readings. I can see you. I can work with you. I can reflect back to you what I see. Together, we can identify these pieces. But then the next question comes up. What do I do with this? What am I here to create? What am I here to lead? What am I here to innovate in? What do I need to communicate to the world? Like, okay, I got this thing. Now what?
Yeah, you have the self-awareness, but where do you even begin to apply it? Okay, so what do you do?
Right. Well, everybody's going to be different. It depends. So for some people, it's around, like, a lot of the work I do is around personal branding. But the personal branding work that I do, it's not like a cute little tagline and, let's find a gimmicky title for you, or create some kind of a persona. It's like, let's just honestly, authentically, and accurately explain you. I always tell my clients, you have to control the narrative, because if you don't control the narrative, somebody else will, and they might not get it right.
Perception is reality.
Indeed. So you have this one opportunity is around just being able to say, "Oh my gosh, there are these things about me, and I don't know how to tell the world." I said, "Okay, well, let's do that through personal branding." And then for my leadership clients, they'll say, okay, well, I understand this about myself and I have this, personal brand. How do I communicate that as a leader? How do I use this as a leader? And so, what is the vision that you have for your company? What is the vision that you have for your team? How can you call upon these unique strengths and innate gifts to show up fully as a leader that people will say, that is the person who I am following? Because if you come up there and you're just strictly technical and giving out instructions and step by steps, that's not necessarily leadership. That's more just, here's a list of things to do. You're a taskmaster. So are you a visionary leader or are you a taskmaster? And having this understanding of your deep genius elevates yourself as a leader. So you're not just, barking out orders. You get people enrolled in your vision, and everything seems to happen a lot easier, a lot faster, and a lot smoother when everybody buys into the vision.
What happens, Nancy, when, and maybe, this is kind of our conversation that started, during our pre-call, when you do this reflection, you think about, what are my natural gifts? What is my life experience? What is my background in education? And you kind of come up with this belief, right? Awareness around like who you are and how you can provide value. But then you recognize that in some area of your life, you're actually working counter to those things. So you're maybe not leveraging a strength. You're maybe doing something that you're not qualified to do, or maybe from a life experience, doing something that you don't want to do. So, because I feel like that's kind of the recent choice that I made to make that resignation from that board isn't because I don't love that board. It's just from doing an assessment around like, this actually doesn't work for me anymore. But what do you do? Like, what would your advice be to someone when they look at that and you're like, and you connect it back to your life and you're like, I'm really not leveraging my deep genius. Like, how do you then start to like move into that trajectory?
Well, you need to make some decisions. And I never push anybody out into the deep end of the pool and say, all right, here, go figure it out. I'm a firm believer in having a foundation underneath you before you do any of this. So when I start working with people through this process, we actually will look at core values. What are the things that you stand for? What are the things that are important to you? What are the things that when they are dishonored, it gets you angry? Because sometimes people say, oh, yeah, these are my top values. And I said, okay, well, tell me about the last few times you've gotten mad at anything. And then we're going to pull out what was the boundary, the value that was crossed. And so then you realize, well, I was disrespected, so I got angry. So, okay, so respect is one of your core values. Did you name it? Well, no. Well, it's showing up. This is how it's showing up. And so we look at, making sure that we have that understanding, making sure that we have the right words that describe who we are and our genius. Some people are geniuses at simplifying complex processes. Do you say the word simplify when you describe yourself? Do you let people know that simplifying things is one of your jams? No, you don't. You need to start doing that. Are you a person who optimizes, things? You're like that process improvement ninja. Everywhere you look around, you're always looking at like, this could be better. And let me tell you how. There are people who just seriously walk around like that. Are you that person who really senses others? And you realize that that's a deep gift of yours. So empathy and emotional intelligence. Are you letting people know that? So that's part of it. It's like you first have to understand those core values. You have to understand those. I call them your power words. And are you just kind of keeping that to yourself or letting the world know? That's important. And that's one of the pieces of where we start.
So how do you find those words? I mean, so I get being able to maybe do that assessment of yourself, but I know one of the challenges is to truly embody that because we still marginalize maybe what those things mean. So how do we begin to maybe embrace it in a way that's confident and positive and connecting with like who we truly are instead of being like, I don't know, I don't want to come off as cocky because you're supposed to, just do what, think of the messages, right? That we've all been told like, oh, like it's everyone has strengths. Don't talk about yours. How do you like, what are those barriers that will naturally come up? I think I picture just fighting off those messages like, Jen, like you're not that great. Like everyone can do it. Don't worry. I say all of that stuff all the time. I'm just total jerk to myself. And just like some people listening might resonate with. And if you don't, I'm jealous of you because I hate inner critic talk. But what do you like? How do you find those words? How do you
Well,
start to actually like live it, breathe it, own it?
well, I mean, I provide my clients with like lists and lists of words. I mean, if you want to find the words, there's lists of words. I have them. I don't know if you want to go search them, like, strong verbs. I mean, whatever it is, you don't always have to say them because it might sound kind of weird. Like, you don't walk up in conversation and say, I maximize productivity. It's like, that sounds kind of weird. But if you know in the back of your head that that's what you do, there's something about the knowing. When somebody has swagger, they don't tell you how cool they are. You see it, you feel it, they embody it. So you just have to let it sink into your bones and let people know that about you without you having to necessarily pronounce it. I think that's one of the reasons why I do a lot of work in personal branding, because I always dislike the way people are taught to communicate, because it never sounds natural. It never sounds like it's in the flow. And I think it comes on a little strong, and you can say, well, that person's sure full of themselves. And they don't really mean to come across that way. That's just how they were taught. I'd rather somebody feel so comfortable in their own skin that the language that comes out when you're talking about yourself, when you're in your deep genius, you want to communicate that, it's natural and authentic. It doesn't feel like you just had to suddenly, pull out a script and start reciting something that somebody taught you how to do. Yeah. But there are simple ways of doing this that there are words that we can latch onto that really energize our conversations and help people get a mental picture of you in your deep genius.
But we have to find those words. And so one of the things you just touched on that you do. So once you find your deep genius, understanding the three areas of that, of you that combine together to create a unique value, then it comes down to how do you brand it? How do you give voice to that? And so your work is also, obviously you're a keynote speaker, you're an executive coach and helping people find that deep genius, but then it's how do you brand it? So what's the starting point? And I know that there's a tool that you can share with our listeners too, that maybe are on this journey of thinking about how do I brand myself? What does that look like once you find your deep genius? What happens after that?
It's so much fun. One of the things I tell people is just have as many different ways of communicating or being confident in your deep genius to be able to have this conversation. So don't just rely on the one elevator pitch that you learned at some networking event or whatever. And that can serve its purpose sometimes, but don't just rely on that. I always tell people, like, they say, well, we need the 30-second elevator pitch. And I said, well, if you're pitching for funding, going to an actual pitch fest, yeah, you have to say it a certain way because you are hardcore selling an idea right there. But if really I'm in the elevator with you and I just want to meet another human being, I don't want to be pitched. I don't know who, I know that there's that urban legend of somebody was in the elevator and they had the right thing that they said. And the next thing you know, they made the billion-dollar deals and everybody lived happily ever after. Sometimes I just don't want all that broadcasting in my face. I really, truly want to know you as a person. And so what are some different ways we can do that? Now, and you've asked me a couple of times about words. So I want to throw a couple of words out. These are some of the most common ones that I watch people use and feel really comfortable with. But for example, I use the word simplify. There are some people who are very good at simplifying a complex process. If you do that and it comes easily and naturally to you, use that language. Simplify. Let people associate you with the word simplify or streamline or demystify. Or for me, I started my life off as a teacher. The word teach, the verb teach, that is me. That's what I do. I teach and I reflect. Somebody talks to me, it doesn't matter who you are. It could be the person putting cable in. It could be somebody coming over and dropping off a package. I could immediately reflect back to somebody what I see as their strength. I can't live my life without doing that. That's part of my deep genius. So when people know me as one who teaches and who reflects, I use that language. They know that about me. There's people who make connections, just authentic connections with people. So just think about that and put words to it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So Nancy, how does our audience get in touch with you? How can they potentially work with you to maybe help discover their deep genius?
Well, I have, if you can come to my website, talentandgenius.com, and there are, a few different ways you can contact me there if you want me, for speaking, for coaching, for training. That is a really easy thing to do, is just go to talentandgenius.com. There's a free resource there that I call 10 message starters. And this one has been so much fun. I have used this with entrepreneurs. I've used this with aerospace engineers. I've used this with CEOs. I've used this with, oh my gosh, people in health and wellness. I mean, just every kind of industry. And it's 10 sentence starters. It's like these 10 little frameworks, almost like Mad Libs. You could fill in the blanks, but they range from everything to, more of the formal, I simplify complex processes so companies can make more money, to I'm a cross between Mr. T and Mr. Rogers, to I'm a geek whisperer. What do you do with all of those different things? And so I show people how they can create these interesting little message starters. And then, like, the next level piece of it is how you can even piece them together and create a new bio for yourself, or a new way to introduce yourself, or a new way to be identified. It's really fun. And the people that I've taught this to, as I said, are from a wide range of fields. Everybody always has some kind of an aha moment, and they'll take it and apply it. Like LinkedIn profiles start getting changed, or somebody's, talking in a different way about themselves when they're introducing themselves around a table. It's been pretty life-changing for a lot of people.
Yeah, I imagine it also just gives a different vote of confidence to truly appreciate ourselves and the contributions that we offer to a team, an organization, community, our friends. I love that. So if you want to get that, the 10 or the 10 message starters, or just, get to know more about Nancy's work, they can head on over to talentandgenius.com. Is that right?
That is correct.
Nancy, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you so much for your insights on how we can tap into our deep genius. It's an important topic, and I hope that people walk away with seeing their own unique gifts. Thank you for helping them find that.
Thank you for having me here. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Leadership Habit Podcast. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Nancy. If you want to get her tips on how to talk about yourself in 10 message starters, you can head on over to talentandgenius.com. There you can also book Nancy for speaking, coaching, training, you name it. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcast. And most importantly, if you thought of someone that could benefit from this, don't forget to share this with them. Thank you so much for your attention. If your organization is looking for leadership development training, looking to develop your managers into leaders, head on over to crestcom.com. There, you can sign up for a complimentary 2-hour leadership skills workshop to help your team succeed. Until next time.